This is the Killer Chronicles. The Sons of Death, or SODs, are a street gang based in Richmond, California, that started in the late 1980s and which then expanded throughout the East Bay Area. The SODs were formed out of the region's growing population of immigrant families from Southeastern Asia, particularly those from Laos. But as the gang grew, a diverse range of ethnic groups were allowed to join. Like many gangs, the SODs started simply as a group of friends who hung out together for safety and unity. In the wake of the Vietnam War, the United States saw an influx of Southeastern Asian immigrants that came after the North Vietnamese moved into Laos and Cambodia, where the CIA had waged a secret war in the 1960s and 70s. Those who had supported the United States fell out of favor with the new communist regime and were forced to flee. In the late 1980s, many children of Laotian immigrants felt disconnected from their parents and were subjected to anti-Asian bullying and persecution, which still exists today. So, they naturally banded together into groups, some of which eventually evolved into non-traditional street gangs like the SODs. At its peak in the 1990s, the SODs had estimated membership at around 200, and a reputation for violence on par with any other gang in the notoriously violent West Contra Costa County. The area comprises several cities that exist side by side along the San Pablo Bay, a large body of water that connects with the more famous San Francisco Bay. These cities and towns include Richmond, North Richmond, San Pablo, Pinole, Hercules, Crockett, El Cerrito, El Sobrante, and Rodeo, and over the years have been home to numerous criminal organizations, from notorious prison gangs to neighborhood crews with a handful of members. A lot of local residents are multiple generations deep, so despite the area's population of more than 500,000 people, many of the communities have a small town feel where local residents are up in each other's business. In other words, it's a tough place to keep a secret. As the SOD's numbers grew in the early 1990s, the gang found itself at odds with nearly every other gang in the region.
Gangs mark their territory by tagging walls with their initials, but once a rival gang crosses those initials off, that's a death sentence that can trigger drive-bys at any time. Two members from a rival gang known as the Sons of Death do drive by. They ask why their names are scratched out. They leave without firing a shot, but there were some anxious moments.
This is our hood, so we could do anything we want in our hood, right?
But once you saw that car come down the street, you guys all ducked.
Not all of us ducked.
Well, most of you did.
Because we're afraid of our lives.
The SODs are considered a Crip-affiliated gang. They display the color blue, are known to don Detroit Tigers hats, and gang tattoos of their letters, death, or the number 500. Over the years, they've had reported rivalries with other Crip sets in Oakland and San Francisco, white gangs like the Cocoa Boys or the family-affiliated Irish Mafia, as well as Hispanic gangs such as the Nortenos and the Surenos. But their biggest long-term rivals were another predominantly Southeastern Asian gang known as the Color of Blood, or COB. The COB's numbers never quite reached as high as the SODs, but the two gangs clashed on and off for more than a decade. Today, there's a common misconception that the SODs are a thing of the past, but while the gang doesn't have the notoriety it did in the mid-90s, there are still plenty of active members, including some who've been linked to recent shootings in the Bay Area. On July 16, 1997, a group of 5 SOD members from Richmond and San Pablo traveled to Oakland amid an ongoing feud with the Oakland Junior Crips. At around 7 p.m., they spotted a group of about 15 people standing in the driveway of an apartment complex on the 2300 block of East 17th Street and opened fire on the crowd with sawed-off shotguns. 2 13-year-old boys were injured, and a 7-year-old, Su Seo Seifan, who was tagging along with his older brothers, was struck in the neck by a shotgun pellet and killed. Over the next 2 weeks, police arrested a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, and 3 18-year-olds in connection with the shooting. 20 years later, one of the shooters, Kao Se-lee, tearfully admitted to a parole board that they weren't even sure if their intended target was among the group when they opened fire, and that they celebrated after the shooting. "It was heartless," he said between the sobs. At this hearing, Se-lee was granted parole. Just 2 days after Seifan was shot and killed, 19-year-old SOD member Dien Hun of Richmond was gunned down in a drive-by shooting on Sanford Avenue at Rumrill Boulevard, about 3 hours before sundown. Police arrested 4 alleged Color of Blood members: Sang Chum of El Cerrito, Pun Kamam, 20, of San Pablo, and 2 16-year-old boys from Richmond. On December 17, 1999, 16-year-old Hercules resident Michael Buenaluz was exiting J&M Liquors on San Pablo Avenue and Lake Street in San Pablo with his girlfriend and 2 friends when they were accosted by 3 members of the SOD. All juveniles, who apparently took issue with someone in the group wearing red. As Buenaluz and his friends started to drive away, a 15-year-old SOD member pulled out a pistol and fired into the car, killing Buenaluz and paralyzing 2 other occupants. Prosecutors described the shooter as a third-generation SOD member and tried him as an adult, making him the youngest child at the time to ever appear as a criminal defendant in Contra Costa County adult court. Police claimed none of the victims were gang members. In the early morning hours of July 25, 2003, SOD elder Neil Few was hanging out with 4 other SOD members and associates, all teenagers, on the front porch of a house near South 15th Street and Main Avenue in Richmond, when 23-year-old Salvador Chava Espinoza, a member of the Surenos subset known as the Easter Hill Locos, walked by, threw up a gang sign, and yelled something derogatory at the group. The 4 teenagers ran towards Espinoza and jumped him, and one of them pulled out a .38 caliber revolver. But Few told them not to fire and instead instructed the teens to beat Espinoza. They tackled him, slammed his head into a car door, and stomped him into the pavement. Then one of the assailants, Ezekiel Johnson, stabbed Espinoza in the throat, killing him. Police arrested a total of 7 suspects in the murder, either as direct participants or accessories. Neil Few was not arrested until a year later in Utah, where he was extradited back to Richmond and eventually convicted of ordering the murder. Around the same time, a group of Cambodian Crips from San Francisco allegedly ambushed and shot at an SOD member at a house party in Hercules, but instead struck an innocent bystander, ripping off part of a man's arm with a shotgun blast. In 2013, alleged SOD member Kevin Vilayngeun conscripted a girlfriend, Brittany Bernard, to lure 43-year-old Rodel Sarmiento from the San Pablo Lytton Casino, where Sarmiento had been on a winning streak, to an area of Richmond where Vilayngeun ambushed and shot him in an attempted robbery. Vilayngeun was later sentenced to 50 years to life. Bernard also received a life sentence but was ordered released from prison in 2020 after a change in state law abolished the theory of murder behind her conviction. In recent years, violent incidents by the SODs have largely tapered off, thanks to a widespread community response to gun violence in Richmond that is credited with scaling back the city's homicide rate that was once considered among the worst per capita in the nation. But the SODs have not completely disappeared from the scene. In January 2020, an alleged SOD member named Jeffrey Vo was arrested and charged with murdering 22-year-old Albany resident Robel Tedes in the city of San Pablo. Vo allegedly shot Tedes on the orders of a high-ranking SOD member who helped Vo escape capture for several months after the homicide. Vo's case is still pending, according to reports in the local media. While the SODs are now several generations deep, many who joined the gang as children are now living out normal lives in society, having left the gang behind. In 1995, one former member named Pao Se-cha explained why the lifestyle became too much for him to bear. Quote, "You're always looking to see who's coming around the corner. If it was the police, we'd take off. If it was someone we didn't know, the guns would come out. Our gang's code was simple. If someone cuts off your arm, you cut off both of his." That's it for now. Thank you for listening. If you have stories that you would like us to cover, tell us about them. Please like and subscribe.